5000 mAh battery, a high refresh rate display, a 6nm chip, a 50 megapixel dual camera, stereo speakers, 5G, and much, much more. This is the POCO M4 Pro 5G. Hi guys, it's ASBYT, and last year on the channel I took a look at the POCO M3, a smartphone that retailed for approximately $150 and I thought offered a lot more than I was expecting. Yes, it had its shortcomings of course, but for a budget phone I felt it punched well above its weight. Why is this important, you may ask? Well, quite simply, 1 year on we have the brand new generation, the M4 Pro 5G. But can it repeat the feat? POCO reached out to sponsor this first look, but as always on the channel, I will tell you what I like and things that I think potentially could be improved in a future product. Drop a like on the video if you enjoy it and find it helpful, and sub if you're new to the channel and like this sort of content. Now, as well as the phone, POCO also sent across this special extras box, which included a couple of POCO branded t-shirts, a POCO hat, and a little POCO lion, which is pretty cool indeed, and definitely a new addition to the ASBYT family. I'm not quite sure how Dotty feels about him, but I'll let you know on Twitter and Instagram how their relationship blossoms over time. So in this budget sector of the market, manufacturers tend to look for areas that they can focus on, and also areas that they think they could potentially compromise on, of course, to bring the costs down to, in turn, give those savings to you, while still maintaining a competitive edge. And sometimes both sides of the coin can arrive in the same area. Case in point of this is the display. It is LCD, which is cheaper to make than AMOLED. It isn't the brightest at around 450 nits, and the construction is the cheaper Gorilla Glass 3, as it's a few generations old. But outside of the slightly larger chin, it does have a really nice large 6.6-inch full screen design, a full HD plus resolution, a 90Hz refresh rate for that smooth scrolling experience, with a 240Hz touch sampling rate, which should help gaming, etc. More on that shortly. The display also has a dynamic switch feature which allows it to change the refresh rate between 50, 60 and 90 depending on what you're doing to help with power consumption, which is great. Another thing that's great is the battery. 5000 mAh, flagship capacity, and a 33 watt fast Type-C charger powering the device from 0 to 100% in just about an hour. And it's included in the box, something that we've seen drop off from the flagship side of the market, as has the idea of a headphone jack, which again, this has. Ticking those boxes. Boxes. That was a bad one. If we flip to the rear, we have a frosted finish here, great for reducing fingerprints, and overall it has a very similar look to last year's offering. But crucially, I think they've made a pretty substantial change to the camera setup, and in a positive way. We have seen, and in fact I've been quite vocal on this, and quite critical about how manufacturers tend to include a 2 megapixel macro, 2 megapixel depth sensor for example, to kind of bulk up the camera array and make the consumer feel like they're getting more value for money, when in reality they're quite fun to play around with, but they're very cheap to manufacture, and as a result they're fairly poor in quality. And after reviewing a few devices like this, I have said before, I would prefer for brands to have less lenses but spend more time and more money on actually making the ones they do include a little bit better. And it seems like maybe POCO have kind of heeded that advice. Not that they should really listen to my advice because I talk a lot of waffle, but because we simply have a dual camera setup this time, including a 50 megapixel primary sensor and an 8 megapixel ultra wide. For me, the most important lenses for most people. Would I like to have maybe seen a telephoto lens with optical zoom for clearer, sharper zoom shots? Sure, but including all three would definitely have bumped the price of the handset up. They could have also replaced the ultra wide angle lens with a telephoto lens and just had a primary and a telephoto. But again, that would be a subjective advantage. Let me know what you think in the comments. Would you prefer an ultra wide angle lens or a sort of a better zoom lens with optical zoom? In terms of actual camera performance, the 50 megapixel sensor produces some really nice, detailed, sharp shots. Yes, you can get a little bit of blur if the subject in your photo is moving, but that's a fairly common problem on smartphone photography as a whole. But when the camera hits the shot, the results supersede the price. Obviously, if you're looking to crop in on shots, I would recommend using that main primary sensor as opposed to the ultra wide, for example, because when you zoom in on those shots, often the actual image quality on the 8 megapixel lens isn't, it's not going to be as good for you, but a really nice option to have if you're taking shots of countryside or cityscapes, for example. Yeah, nice to have. The ultra wide also has a 119-degree field of view, so it captures a good amount of the scene. Now, unfortunately, we don't have any 4K video capabilities on the POCO M4 Pro. 1080p on both the front and the back, still more than good enough for most people. And you do get 60 frames per second option as well on that rear camera. So if you're taking fast-paced action shots, for example, you wanted to slow it down or you just wanted it to look a little bit smoother, you can do that. Could they have made it 4K? Possibly. Again, the price would have probably been more because of it. How important is 4K video for you? Only you will know. That 1080p on the front-facing camera comes courtesy of a 16 megapixel lens, and you can also achieve some really decent selfies in good lighting. You do understandably lose quality on the front and back cameras when you do take photos when the light is dimming, but you do have a night mode as well as other software features including time-lapse and slow motion. Nothing hugely groundbreaking, but nice to have. And while we're on software, it is Android 11 with MiUI for POCO over the top. The latest iteration has some really nice features, including new dynamic animations to wallpapers, new notification sounds, better privacy controls, and all-round system optimizations to improve power consumption and system performance. Now, another factor that, of course, has a large bearing on performance of a device is the internal hardware, and my M4 Pro 5G here has 6GB of RAM, 128GB of internal storage, and the MediaTek Dimensity 810 chip built on a 6nm process. I mentioned in my Pixel 6 Pro review that even though the Google Tensor chip powering that device was not as good benchmarks-wise as flagship chips from Apple, Samsung and Qualcomm, for example, SoCs are so powerful now, even lesser performing ones are still more than capable enough to cover the habits of 95% of users, and the same pretty much applies here. Lower on benchmark scores and obviously not on the same almost flawless user experience we are used to in 2021 from flagship counterparts, but media consumption, multitasking and even some high intensive gaming titles can be achieved with little to no issues. So really for this lowly price, you're not sacrificing much at all. Yes, side by side you would notice the difference performance wise between this and a £1,000 flagship premium smartphone, but there's not a huge gulf in class that there possibly once was, even just a few years ago. A few more features include an integrated 5G modem, so you are future-proof there, an IR blaster, which some still find really handy, and expandable storage of up to 1TB. You also have a redesigned side-mounted fingerprint scanner, which is pretty quick and reliable, and as I've said before, for the price, this is a very, very complete smartphone. It is available in Power Black, I want to say Cool Blue. It is Cool Blue. Power Black, Cool Blue, and POCO Yellow. Which colour would you go for? Drop a like on the video if you enjoyed it and found it helpful. Subscribe if you're new to the channel and love everything tech and want to see more content like this. I love you and leave you. I'll see you in the next one. ASBYT, peace out.
Do just what you want.